Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the leadership series for people who build, scale and shape the future of life sciences. I'm your host, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International. Today's guest is Michaela Griggs, a turnaround CEO, board director and commercial leader whose career has been built on taking challenges others often avoid. From global leadership roles at Bayer, 3M and Allergan, through to CEO positions and board appointments across healthcare, fertility, aesthetics and biotech. Throughout her career, Michaela has built a reputation for stepping into complex situations, creating growth where others see obstacles, and developing high-performing teams that consistently outperform expectations. This episode is about courage, reinvention, talent development, and why the best leaders often choose the harder path when others look for the easier one. Michaela, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Great. Thank you. I've been really looking forward to this one. You and I have had some really interesting discussions. I've really enjoyed how we've kind of built some of the ideas for this episode, but we always kick off Active Ingredients in the same way. And I like to understand what you believe are the three key ingredients of leadership and why.
It's a great question. I think leadership's very complex. It was quite hard for me to think about just three things, but when I finally sort of took a deep breath and boiled it all the way down, I think it's really around being brave and having courage of your convictions, coupled with some strong communication so people understand what your convictions are. I also think really good people skills, good interpersonal skills, underlined with integrity, because you have to be a very integral person to have great people skills. And then finally, I would say having a vision for where you want to go, and being able to create that vision and bring it to life.
Yeah, which is often the most talked about, I would say, ingredient, but it's often the one where people have sometimes the biggest gaps in leadership in their earlier years.
Yes, I think when you finally become a leader, you're so used to being operational and just doing tasks and getting things achieved. And you're often given leadership roles because you can achieve stuff. And you've been successful and you've built a brand or you've launched a new product, and they're like, okay, we'll give you a promotion. Here's another one. And each time that you get to a bigger role, the task becomes more complicated. The challenge of what you're being asked to do is normally a bit bigger and broader, and you normally have more people that you're trying to bring along. So the vision part of it becomes more and more important the larger the role you have. And then you mentioned earlier, particularly when you shift from being maybe a leader or a CEO or the head of a company and then want to be on a board, is even more important that you've got some form of vision, because you're not in the day-to-day. You can't just make things happen. You have to bring people along with you. You have to have a long range thought process, and you have to have some sort of stake in the ground way there in the future, that you can articulate and help people know where you want to go. I think it's also the same when you're doing career development. I know early in my career, I was very much about, well, what's next? What's the next run on that ladder? And it took me a little while, but sort of there came a point where I suddenly went, having a run on a ladder isn't really very helpful, because let's just say I got caught up in a boss who couldn't articulate what comes next. And for me to be able to think a little bit further out, maybe even 5, 10, 15 years further out, as to what do I want for myself? What's my vision for myself of what I want to be in the future? It freed up a lot of my thinking, but also helped me articulate better from my managers and people around me as to the sort of support and development that I needed. Because it was easier to say, one day I think I want to be, is that possible? And if so, what do I need to do? And what skills do I need to develop in order to get there? And because it's not as scary as is, I want that next promotion. How am I going to get it in the next 12, 15 months? It's more freeing for people to have that open runway. And I think that's the same with business and with career development. When you have that open thinking, that curiosity, that thought process of what's possible in the future, and then work a little bit backwards as to how do I get there. It's good. It's like being on a vacation and saying I want to go to Edinburgh from London, but which route do I want to take? Do I want to go up the East Coast? Do I want to go up the West Coast? Do I want to through the middle of the country? Do I want to stop on the way? Do I want to? It's easier to map out that journey when it's a little bit out of reach and more sort of a objective or a vision or a goal for somewhere else. It's easier to take the little steps that get.
Yeah, and it must be slightly, as you said, freeing to not be time bound and to be progressing to this
Yes,
place of, progress.
definitely. And it also gives you the opportunity that over time, as that journey goes forward, you can see whether your vision has evolved, whether the destination needs to change. I think, when you're thinking about a business, and I'll come back to career as well because it happens in careers, but when you're thinking about a business, the landscape often changes. Right now we're in such technological advancements. Everything around us seems to be changing every 30 seconds. AI has brought a completely different perspective on how we do product development, how we social media has really changed how we talk to our customers, etc., etc. If you don't have the flexibility to bend a little with the environment around you, maybe a competitor comes out with a product that you're in development with, and suddenly you're going to launch into a more competitive space than you expected. You have to have the ability to adapt. And if you're too close in and too focused and not enough out there, this is where the word vision, I know it's overused, but sort of long range planned, you don't know how to adapt or move with the times. It comes back to that sort of analogy I made of like you're going to Edinburgh, you hit the A1, you're trying to get onto the M1, and there's a big accident. There's a truck overturned, yada, yada, yada. If you miss that exit to get off, you might be stuck in that traffic for hours. Whereas if you hit the exit, you might get a nice trip to Cambridge. You might be able to do a little detour up into the Staffordshire countryside, and suddenly your journey is more fulfilling. Or is more broadening in some way. And every little setback when you're planning long term becomes an opportunity to learn and grow, and develop and do something bigger and better. I've learned most from my mistakes than I have from my successes.
Yeah.
And by having that long range, longer thought process, it's easier to articulate to others where you're going, and it's okay if we have to do a little bit of a U-turn, but it's also easier, I have found, to also navigate my career to achieve some big objectives that I don't think I would have achieved if I had just said, what's next?
Yeah. And before the whole what's next, the beginning of your, professional life, let's go back to the early years. Looking back,
Yeah,
how much do you think your upbringing shaped the leadership or the leader that you became?
a lot. I think it was very instrumental and foundational. So I've had people criticize. I speak quite nicely. I have a quite reasonable elocution, which people would say, oh, she's in the UK. In the US, it doesn't matter. They love it. I live in the US and they absolutely love my accent. But in the UK, sometimes I got, well, you sound like you come from an upper class family. You must have had money, yada, yada, yada. I didn't. Came from very, very humble beginnings. I was the first person in our family to go to college. My mum and dad left school at like 14. And, my mum was a waitress. My dad was a chef. And my grandparents were farmers. But I I struggled at school. My dad was in the army and we moved around a lot. So I didn't really have a very consistent foundation. But I found that gave me a real ability to adapt, and I had to learn how to integrate very, very quickly into new places. And sort of at around 11, 12, I felt like going to boarding school would be a really good thing to give me some stability. And, little old cheeky Michaela is like, I want to go to boarding school. And so that's what my parents were very fortunate through the military to be able to put me through boarding school. And I had an entrance exam and I didn't do very well on it. And they were like, she's really struggling in English. We'll accept her, but she has to take a year back in school. And as just going into senior school, an 11, 12-year-old, that's really quite a hard decision to have to make, to take back another year in school. But I felt really strongly that this was the place for me, and I did it, and I'm really glad I did. And then a couple of years later, they found out that I was dyslexic, and I got so there was a real reason why I was struggling, and that was very, very freeing for me, because it was suddenly like, well, I'm not stupid. I'm actually reasonably smart to have got where I've got with something that's holding me back. And it just gave me this real determination that I wasn't going to let it define me. I was going to make sure that I could overcome things. I had teachers that are like, well, your dyslexia will mean that you might not go to university, you might not do this, you might not do that. I was pretty good seamstress. My hobby was sewing. So it was like, well, why don't you go and, be a seamstress? And I thought, well, maybe I'll be a designer. That would be awesome. But I really liked science and math, and I was quite good at math. And I quickly realized that maybe there was more for me. And I was like, damn it, they're wrong. I'm going to do something. And I ended up really focusing on physics, chemistry, maths. And I did go to university, and I got a medical qualification. I have an MBA. And I've taken slightly different routes because a lot of people, even in interviews, underestimate me. I come over as a sort of soft, kind person. I'm very people orientated, incredibly people orientated, and that can be misunderstood sometimes as maybe too soft and kind, but I've got a rod of steel down my spine and I hide it in kindness. But it makes me an incredibly determined person to overcome challenges, but a strong belief that I can't do it without others. Yep. I've learned throughout life that I need others to get me to my end goal. And so that all got shaped from a very young age.
Yeah, and it seems as though resilience has almost been a defining strength for you.
Yes. The determination, resilience, there have been many times I think other people could empathize with this, but when you're at school, sometimes a bad thing happens and all you want to do is cry. And I've done that. I've gone into a closet, cried my eyes out, come out. I'm going to be able to do this. I'll prove them wrong. But yeah, you just keep going. You just, I think determination to want to achieve is, and to be something that I'm proud of and other people are proud of was important to me. But yeah, pretty resilient, pretty determined. I would say pretty brave in some ways, in that just to take risks and chances, and sort of reflective as well. I think having being able to reflect on either business challenges, but also reflect on yourself, and really understand where your core strengths might be. And that comes down to a business as well, what the core strengths of a business are, and being able to really lean into them. Understand where the fragility is, or where you're not so good, either a business not as strong, person not as strong, and be able to say, how can I develop that, or how can I mask it? How can I bring up other traits, make them stronger? And then the traits that are not as strong for me will automatically rise at the same time. And I use that when I'm developing people. I try to think about what's their biggest strengths and how can their biggest strengths help them overcome some of the things that might be holding them back. Sometimes focusing so much on somebody's weakness or development areas can be crippling for that person. If you can develop on improving a strength that by default also helps build up something that they're not as good at, then that can often be very, very valuable. For me with the dyslexia, to have someone to ask me to write a really long thesis is really crippling for me to start. But to write a PowerPoint presentation, easy as sin. And I don't know why it's different. One's very visual, I think, and it's bullet point orientated. And it also has the more ability for me to show data rather than explain data. It was very freeing. So to be, in the business world, PowerPoints are very, very important. So that was great. In the UK, interestingly enough, you often wrote out a lot of things, and in the US, you write a lot of PowerPoints. So I think, finding that difference of how you can communicate in an effective way. I'm an auditory communicator more than a written communicator. Writing long emails is painful for me, so I would often write a short summary email in a lot of bullets and ask for a meeting where I could explain the situation versus expect to have to do it in a written format. And being able to do that for others brings me a lot of joy, to be able to see what someone's strengths might be and how they can use those, and where their opportunities are and where we can find a way where we can develop them without just saying, you have to be able to do, because sometimes that's not possible.
Yeah. I mean, before we get into the kind of like relentlessness to prove people wrong and how that's really helped your career, I'd like to just give the listeners an opportunity to maybe understand more of when you first felt like a leader. So this could have been at school, it could have been, at university, it could have been last week. You know, for people, it's a different time. When did you go, oh, do you know
Yeah.
what? I actually feel like a leader now.
So I think I have a bit of imposter syndrome. So even today, sometimes I don't always feel like a leader, but people gravitate to me. So there must be something. But there are a couple of moments where I think I stepped out knowing I wanted to lead others. One was at school, so a head of house. I was given the opportunity to be a head of house in my boarding house, and it could be a really horrible thing to be because you're the bossy little what's it. But I kind of enjoyed sort of bringing the girls along to, navigate how to give ideas for weekend activities and things like that. So that was kind of the very first moment I realized I liked leading others, or I felt like I could do good for others. Probably the next time was a little later in my career, in my late 20s. And I had the opportunity. I was a sales rep for a pharmaceutical company. It's a very common way to start in your leadership journey in pharma. And we were switching a product, and I saw an opportunity of how I could train my team, the team that I worked with on over-the-counter OTC switch and how to talk to pharmacists, because it was going from a prescription to a pharmacy medicine, a P medicine, versus all the way just to direct to consumer. And I ended up writing a small training manual. And my boss really liked it. I was like, this is how I go about it. And he's like, could you expand it and share it with the rest of the team? There was about 12 of us, which I did. And then it happened to be his boss was in the room when I was sharing it. And he was like, well, this is great. Could we roll it out nationally? And so that was the first time I realized I could have a really big impact by doing something what I thought was quite small. And it was an extracurriculum thing. It wasn't part of my job, so to speak. And that's where I realized that, I really liked leading others and giving guidance and direction. And it sort of set me back. I want to do that at some point. I want to have people under me and lead a team. And then you had secondments in the UK where if somebody went on maternity leave, they would maybe pick somebody else to do their job for their maternity leave, and then somebody would take your job,
Yep.
etc., etc. And I had that opportunity to actually be a regional sales manager as a secondment. And that was really great in sort of a very comfortable way of developing my skills of leading a team and developing others. And then I took the path to go into marketing and got my marketing qualifications, my MBA. And the team got smaller. And so in a way, a lot of people would look at that and say, well, that's kind of backwards, because if you just stayed in sales, you could have been national sales manager and blah, 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 and had a bigger and bigger team. But I think being well-rounded was important to me, doing something else, another sort of part of the business. And then I didn't have anyone reporting to me. I went back to being an assistant brand manager after being a regional manager, which was interesting.
Yeah.
But, learned something new, and then slowly got opportunities to go internationally and on bigger brands and bigger teams and have more teams under me. And I've always kind of then just looked for other opportunities where I can influence and impact others. And sort of the time I was in my mid-30s, people were telling me I was a natural leader, and people wanted to work for me, or they'd asked to be on my team. And you suddenly woke up one day and said, well, actually, maybe I'm a good manager.
Yep.
I was like, well, maybe I'm more than just a manager. Maybe I am a leader. And that sort of opened up a lot of doors for what I could possibly do in the future.
Yeah. And then, you're, as I said earlier, your kind of relentlessness to prove people wrong then kind of took you on a different journey sometimes internally. As you said, then you went from leading a team to then being back in a kind of specialist role. You've obviously had a willingness to take on either difficult or almost kind of like broken situations. Why does that enthuse you so much?
I think I have a sense of curiosity, and, I can look at things and say, I don't think it's as broken as everyone thinks it is. I do it with people as well. Often I'll get somebody on my team that no one else wants to manage, and I'm like, nothing's really broken. There must be a way to fix it. I think one of the really pivotal points in my career was actually a business that I was asked to go and run, the One a Day business, and which is a multivitamin business here in the US. And it really wasn't doing very well. And the organization was sort of like, well, we'll give it a go. And I joined it as the brand manager, and we were going down one particular path, and it really wasn't working. And I can remember being in the annual business plan meeting, and the head of the company basically saying, we either need to turn this business around or we need to sell it. Or, it wasn't hitting the profitability marks. Its cost of goods were too high. It wasn't really competing well, but it was a really important legacy brand for the company. And I went back to my office, and I think a lot of people, given that as an assignment and feeling like everyone around the table was not really vested, and it wasn't the exciting brand to be on that everyone wanted to invest in. It was kind of like, we need to do something with this. And if we don't, then, we'll have to just, can it?
Yeah.
I was like, no, this is a really cool brand. It's been around 50, 60 years. It's got meaning to consumers. And I think there must be a way. And I sort of ended up noodling in my, spare time, and planes give me a lot of time to think, because interestingly enough, no one can bother you. It's really hard at work these days, I think, to have uninterrupted space where you can just think. And interestingly enough, I was on a really long plane journey, 6-7 hours journey, one coat, really long. And I had, days before you could get on the internet on the plane. I had a couple of flash drives and some data, and I just started noodling around with this thought as to what could this brand be. What was the driving factor from the consumers that love this brand, etc., etc., etc. And then I found a thought partner, which was really important. So I got off the plane. I'd written, like I said, I like PowerPoints to think, so I'd written a small deck, maybe 10 slides, with sort of like my scraps of my thoughts, and I knew I needed a thought partner. So my agency partner, actually, I sent it to her, and I'm like, what do you think? We're going to have to communicate, yada, yada, yada. And she and I bounced backwards and forwards, and she came up with some lovely, really cool language, which is what I can't do, some headlines and some whatever. And we ended up coming up with this slogan. And I think I just one day just walked into my boss's office and said, look, I've got an idea for the brand. And I shared what it was and what I thought it was. And he was like, yeah, right. Sure. And I'm like, I think we could. And I kept noodling, and we had a pipeline of new products, a new positioning. I did some research, and everything was coming back really positive, that this was the right direction to take. And I can remember having to, just as we were about to launch this big new idea, and I went up on stage at a sales meeting because I needed the sales guys obviously to sell this into like Walmart, Target, give it another go type of thing. And standing up and having to basically say, look, I think I personally have made a lot of mistakes on this business. We were going down this path. We were doing A, B, or C, and it really wasn't working. But as part of that journey, we found this huge one big insight. And I think that by leveraging and leaning into that insight and doing X with this brand, will take us to a new level. And here's 3 new products, and we're going to have a pipeline of new products, and it's going to be every 6 to 9 months, because the marketplace, well, the biggest insight was the marketplace was every time you came out with something new that worked, you were knocked off by private label within less than 9 months. And so you had a really short window, and you really had to, build fast, blah, blah, blah. So a pipeline of new products and a lot of new products on a regular basis was important. And that didn't necessarily mean to be reformulating. That might be a new message on another ingredient, so it sounded new. So there was a whole simple things. And I would say half the audience was on board and was excited, and the other half called BS and said, basically, you're whatever, you're not, I don't believe you. And I can remember the first new product we launched, it did really well out of the gate. Not phenomenal, but really well for that brand. And one of the salespeople came up to me and said, why didn't you tell me this was going to be great? And I'm like, Cindy, I did. I stood on stage and I told you, and you just told me I was talking BS. Oh yeah, I remember saying that now. You were right. I'm like, great. And then we had another idea for another product that we did research on. We did this bases and volumetric, and it basically came back saying it's going to be about $20 million. And the company sort of slogan was, oh, everything comes back at 20. It's only going to be 10. You can have enough investment for $10 million product. So I was like, okay, but I know it's going to be bigger.
Yeah.
I know we're going to get to that 20 plus. And it was $100 million in 12 months. And everyone went, whoa, now we know she's right.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, you've done really well on here. We're going to give this brand to somebody else, and we'd like you to go over onto this brand that's also not doing very well. And I'm like, yeah, bring it on. That's great. We'll go do it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, the next kind of question was going to be about brave leadership, because what you've done there is you've taken risks, you've proven your concept, you've proven your way of leading, but then you've been ready to let it go and take on another challenge.
Yes, I think that's a really important part of leadership. I think sometimes people can hang on to something that's going well for them a little too long. It does sometimes need fresh ideas, because you can get, when you've turned something around like that and you're really, really passionate about it's my baby. Even today, people call me sometimes and ask me about that project, because I stay in touch with a lot of people, and it's truly felt like my baby for a long, long time. But they have to grow up. And, I might not have been quite the right person for that product in 2 or 3 years' time. Um, and something else needed the skill set that I had, and it was another challenge. And to be able to just let it go and give it to somebody else, it was hard, but it was rewarding. And to see it keep growing, and it kept growing. And to be honest, the other harder part was the person that was taking it from me probably didn't want my input anymore and really didn't ask any advice. People under her did, which I think says something about that leadership style as well. But I was like, yeah, it's time to let this go and for somebody else to have it. And I was given basically the flagship brand for the company, which was a great opportunity for me to expand my skill sets. It was another interesting challenge. It was the complete opposite of where I'd been, where nobody really cared what happened. And there's a lot of freedom when something's not doing well and no one cares. It's like, if you fix it, great. If you don't, we kind of had no expectations. And then to be on the flagship brand, where absolutely everybody in the company had cut their teeth on it, made their mark on it, and got promoted because of it. And they all wanted to be still part of it. Yet it wasn't doing very well. And to have to tell people that used to run it, well, it's kind of your ideas from whatever, are not what's keeping it going. We need new, fresh ideas. So that was a really good challenge in being able to play a coach, have a vision, use my people skills, and maybe be thinking about building the people around me as well as the business that I'm on, because I had to do a lot of navigating up.
Yep.
And actually influence leadership much more, because they also had a vested interest in this brand, than just thinking about the strategy and having a vision and then saying, let's go do it. There was a lot more persuading on influencing leadership, but people much higher than me in the organization.
Yeah, and because
so that was great.
But that wasn't the only time that you'd kind of built and let go. There were other like catalyst moments, defining programs, building things, and then stepping into new unfamiliar territory. It seemed to be something that, again, kind of enticed you for this squiggly career. You didn't mind taking on these really difficult challenges.
No, I like change. I actually tell everybody I hate change, but it seems like I do like change. I find it very stressful sometimes to have change, but I find it very invigorating as well. So I like new challenges. And sort of to have a new challenge every 2, 3, 4 years is very motivating for me. I think about my career development and other people's career development around competencies and skills that you're going to grow and develop and learn for the future. So having new challenges is important. I also think about things that are outside of my remit and outside of my job, and create projects for myself. And I've done that a few times. While this situation with the brand that was very successful, the 100-day story I was telling you, I was also observing that, we weren't very good at giving performance reviews. And I was chatting with my boss one day. I was just like, some of my colleagues just hate doing performance reviews. And I talked to so many other people in the organization that hate receiving their performance reviews, and they just don't feel they're really very beneficial. And I think if we did more around, competencies and skills and help people understand how to receive a performance review, and maybe if we had laid out these competency guides of what it means to be at each of these levels, would give managers an opportunity to know what they were supposed to be developing between being an assistant brand manager, an associate, a brand manager, a senior, blah, 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 director, etc. And I was a senior brand manager at this point. And what it takes to be a VP like you, to my boss. And I think that'd be really cool. And he's like, yeah, it'd be really cool. Can you do it? And I'm like, sure, I can do this.
Yeah, I'll take it on.
And it was, take that on. And we had some competency guys knocking around. It wasn't like I was starting from scratch. I went down to a colleague of mine in HR and said, hey, my boss has just said so and so and so, and I'm I think we should give it a go. And she's like, I'm on board, I'll help you. So again, enrolling others, I'm big on, I can't do it myself. So that's exactly what we did. We formed a small team. I got a few other people who were interested. We took the old competency guides. We built new competency guides. We wrote them, we got them approved, we launched them, and then I created a training session every year. And what I would do is I would use those competency guides, and I would do 2 training sessions, one for managers and one for people that don't manage. And the one for people that don't manage was how to receive and how to guide your own performance review. And we'd take them through the competence guides and what's their role and how they can, get more out of their manager by taking control of their own reviews. And then for the manager, it was more or less the same thing, because remember, all those managers were also people that would receive reviews. So I would do that piece of, this is what I'm training your people on. And by the way, you can use it with your boss, but this is your role, and this is how to use the competency guides to give a better review. So I did that, and then sort of once that was out of the door, I loved doing the training. So I was always asked to go and do it. But a few of my colleagues were like, yeah, I'd like to do that too. So I'd be, okay, this is how I do it. This is my presentation, but change it. You can do it. So one year they would do it, one year I would do it, or we would split up the sessions. The competency guides went into the hand of somebody else. They noodled them and they improved them every year, which was great. And then maybe 5 or 6 years later, when I was in a much more senior leadership role, someone came back to me and said, you did this years ago. Could you do it for the company? And I ended up doing it for the whole of Bayer. Again, that had to be let go after a while, because there was, at the board level, there was a team that were overseeing it. So it wasn't really mine anymore, though deep down I knew I was doing all the work.
Yeah.
And that team launched it. I had to do all the training, but they launched it and got all the kudos, and they're the pictures on the inside the competencies, and they're like, oh, that's great, this person did that. And then I'm like, no, they didn't, but that's okay. And that's okay, and it is okay, because I got a lot out of that, and an awful lot of people really know what my role was, but also knew that I was mature enough, I suppose, is one way, or for the good of the company and for the betterment of everybody else, it was okay to step back and know what my role was, know what I'd learned from it, but also know that it was important for it to be successful within the company, for other people to have to own it and take it and launch it. And then I was just a smaller cog in that process, even though, it was 9 months extracurriculum activity for me. So I've done that. I've done that a lot. I've done that actually in most companies I've been to.
Yeah, and it seems as though that kind of track of, being, as you say, that kind of professional maturity to grow from being able to let something go, and then continue to actually look for it and take on more challenges outside of your scope, and still have an awareness that I'll do this for a while, pass it back to the business, somebody else gets the kudos, but I can just continue doing what I'm doing. And maybe that's why, you've spoken about this a few times, but maybe that's why your ability to build people and not just businesses up is such a key skill and, strength of yours. Because you said, talent development a couple of times. What does it actually look like for you in practice?
Oh gosh, you're absolutely right. It is really, really important part of my identity as a leader. It's really, really important to me to be considered that I'm being able to build teams and develop people. I have this little mantra in my head, is like, everybody I develop could one day be my boss, so therefore I better develop them really well so that they're a good boss. So that's kind of the mantra I have to keep me centered in the, my ego is involved in this as well, because I think that's important. And the rest of it is really about a desire. I really, really want to help others break their own personal glass ceilings and achieve what they want to achieve, even if it means achieving something that's not going to be in the company or for me ultimately. So I often start a review or a development conversation with an employee. It's like, I know you have a long-term vision for yourself, and if you don't, you should, and we're going to get there, and we're going to help you have one, because I'm hoping that that vision includes not working for me forever, and means, you're going to be a strong person in whatever it is you want to do. And then I can build backwards in, once I get somebody comfortable to be able to give me a little bit more of a long range view. And I've got a back of the napkin exercise that I can now do with people. I didn't know this at the time, but this is how I used to start. Like, once I know really where you want to go, we can talk about what are all the different steps that you're going to need to do to get there. And then we'll bring it back to your job today. And what can I do for you? What business roles can I give you? What tasks can I give you? What assignments can I give you that will help you build that skill set? And then we can look at all the stuff that you have to do and think about all the skills that you want to develop in what you have to do and how well you need to do them and why they'll set you up for a great future. And that often, I find, really helps motivate the person that you're trying to develop or your employee to want to develop. But it also gives you an opening to be able to give constructive feedback and sometimes negative or developmental feedback, or things that are really hard for people to say and hear, in a framework where the employee knows it's in their best interest, because you really are interested in their future, not just, hey, you didn't do this, or you were snarky, or you blah, blah, blah. By turning it around as like, that leadership style isn't going to get you very far.
If you want to
say
get here,
you want to be so and so.
Yeah, then you might need
Yes.
to change this, this, and this.
Yes. If you want this is what you want. Think about all the people that are great that you look at that are like that. Do they do this thing that I just saw you do? And they'll often go, no. And I'm like, so do you really want to be doing it anymore? And they'll be like, no, but I don't know how not to. And I'm like, all right, well, here's a couple of things that I see happen that cause you to do that. You either have a trigger, or I can see that you're stressed. And when you're stressed, you do, and then I can often say, well, one of the things I do when I'm stressed is I bite my back teeth to keep quiet. I'm a talker, the fact that I, can't articulate in the same way in the written word as the spoken word means I talk too much. And one of the most valuable pieces of feedback that I was ever given is, you talk too much and you shut people out from being able to be part of the conversation. So you need to shut up, Michaela. It was really, really hurtful, because, I think it's my secret power of being able to persuade others, and to be told that I'm now at a level in the organization where that's no longer wanted. You've got to allow others to speak. Took me a while to digest, but it was probably one of the most valuable pieces of feedback I was ever given. And to be able to do that for others and use those examples helps people see things in a different way that is, self-reflective for them, and they can digest. So that's why it's important to me. And then I get a better team.
Yeah.
And yes, I often use them and get the broken people and all that sort of stuff, but they stay with me through my life and through my career. And there have been people that have, started as employees of mine or reporting to me, and then become peers and colleagues, or maybe gone to another company and now become advisors and people I can call on and say, I know you've gone and done so and so, and that's a skill set I no longer have. I really need some advice because I'm about to do A, B, or C. And I've got a really big network that's willing to help me because I've been willing to help them.
This is one thing that's just triggered in my mind. What about when you're trying to help somebody get a vision of their future, but maybe they can't quite explain it, or they may not know where they want to go, and they're only looking at that next rung in the ladder? How do you try and help people understand a longer term vision in a different way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not necessarily always easy, but simpler than you might think. So So I have this little process where I force people to say, okay, let's talk about exactly where you are today and what you do, so they really know what their role is today. So, and then I say, try and break out of that and tell me, what does it look like in 10 years time? And I try and go really far out. 5 is fine, but the further you can go. And if they can't do 10, I'm like, 15. Tell me what you want. I don't care whether it's work related. Do you want to own your own business? Even if they're working for me. Do you want to own your own business? Do you want to run a business? Do you want to be a VP? Do you want to be financially independent? Do you want to be married with 6 kids and not working? Literally explode your mind. And it's interesting that most people can then articulate something that's an inkling that, well, I saw this person. They normally come back to work, so it's good. I've only ever once had somebody who's like, no, I really want to learn everything I can. I want to open my own business. I want to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's a very different thing. But most people are like, hey, I saw, A, B, or C person, and I really love what they're doing. I really have a passion for, maybe I could go and run a factory, or maybe I want to be like the vice president or the head. A few people are like, I want to be a CEO. And then you're like, well, do you want to be a CEO of a big company, a small company? Do you want a startup? And you start framing so that you've got a little bit of a vision of what it might look like in the future. And then what I often ask them to do is a couple of different exercises from there. And that's why I say it's the one piece of paper. So you've got your future box, you've got your current box, and then you start talking to them about, okay, let's talk about the future. What are the 3 roles that you think you're going to need that are the roles directly before that future role? So if you want to be a CEO, maybe you need to be a CFO or a chief marketing officer or blah, blah, blah. And you lay it out. And then you say, okay, let's ignore that. And then you go, where are you today? And what are the next 3 roles that you think you could do from where you are today? And that's where, I can push them to think a little differently, because most people are like, well, go from, say you're talking to a brand manager, I want to be a senior brand manager. I'm like, okay, you could be a senior brand manager, or you could go into sales. You've not got any sales experience. We could do a lateral move into something else. So you start pushing them to think about that. And then you say, okay, should we connect the dots and see which of these next moves would lead to the future move of the future, and see if any of them connect, or whether there's other roles you might need in between. And then on those connections, I get them to think about, what skill sets do you need? What competencies do you need? In order to go from today till tomorrow, and then from tomorrow to the next one. And it might be simple things. It might be just experience on a bigger brand, having more people report to you, whatever it is. But then you can come back to them and say, okay, let's now focus on all those skill sets that you talked about that you need for your next assignment. And we want to leave all of those assignments open. You don't want to narrow down. Let's talk about which one of those competencies we can start developing in your current role. And then you just go from there. And, I tend to tell people, keep this little one pager in your planner or wherever it is you want to keep it. It was a cocktail napkin for me in the back of my purse for the longest time. But take it out once a year and look at it and say, is it still true? Yeah. Because you can shift that future every time you learn something. And as you shift the future, you're shifting the one before, and you're not ever locked in. And then you've got your journey and your career map, and you then are in control of your future. But the beauty of doing that is when I'm not their manager and I'm not helping them, or if I'm doing it through a mentoring situation and then have a different manager, I said, you can then either share this with your manager if you trust them enough. Sometimes you don't, but at least you can then have some lexicon that says to your manager, hey, in the next year, I want to be able to develop my skill in, or I want to develop my competency in. What roles can you give me? What assignments can you give me? And it will make your manager a better manager. Yeah. but it will
Yeah.
put you in the driver's seat, and it will help you control your dialogue and your development, and it will bring the best out in your manager to be able to do that for you. And then you can do check-ins every few months. Hey, how am I doing on this competency? Do you think I'm getting there? Do you think I've got the skills? And you've got others that you want to, is it time to shift from this one to this one? Can we add this competency into that ability? You know, can you champion for me to be on another project that's outside of my remit, that's within the company, that gets me exposure to other people, but develops this skill? And you become more rounded, and you actually become more valuable to the organization. And in this day and age where things are changing so much and so quickly, being as well-rounded and as broad in your skill set and showing your value to the company in a broader way is really, I think, very critical to having long-term success.
Yeah, and it's also having that bravery, like you said earlier. It's that bravery and willingness to go and take on those new challenges that are out of that kind of T-shaped career. And it seems like you're almost promoting that non-linear career or non-linear projects to actually make you way more
Yeah.
rounded.
Yeah. I think it's a lattice, not a ladder. And I know that's a trite saying, it's, you know, people say that, but it really is. And if I look back into my early career, you know, I think I started with saying, like, on paper, it looked like I took a backward step. You know, I was a regional manager, and I went and was an assistant brand manager. I got from there to a brand manager in one country, and I was cheeky enough to go and ask somebody if I could have an international assignment because it would round me out. And I was on an international trajectory, and I'm like, but I don't want to go to any of those countries. Could I go to the States? Because it would really teach me some consumer marketing more strongly. And it upset a couple of people, but I got there. And then I got there by having to take another step back. I couldn't go from the UK to the US as a brand manager. I had to go back as an assistant brand manager. And within 2 years, I was a senior brand manager, and everyone came up to me and it's like, what the heck? How did you get promoted so fast? And within 18 months of that was a director. I'm like, well, if you really looked back at my career, I wasn't promoted that fast. I did a lot of laterals early on at different things that really helped me to get to here in a good way. And then the next level was really hard for me. I actually got passed over a couple of times, and I ended up having to be on the team of somebody that I was passed over to that came from outside and wasn't very good. And I went up to the hiring manager and I had to say, you know, why didn't you pick me? I really want that feedback to understand what I didn't have that you needed, that meant you had to go outside of the organization versus me. I'm on the brand. This is a global brand, yada, yada, yada. And I got some interesting feedback, and I'm like, okay, she's totally wrong. But I'm just going to, you know, keep doing what I do and I'll prove her wrong. And, you know, interestingly enough, 6 months later, she gave me a call and she goes, I got a feeling that I might have an issue. And I'm like, you know, I think you have. And it was a moment where I had to be the most brave in a lot of ways, because it was a really scary thing to say to somebody that you wanted them, because this person, I wanted them to give me a bigger job. I wanted them to hire me. And I had to tell them they made a mistake. And I'm like, yes, I've been on this team. You've made a mistake. The employee that you hired, this is what I'm seeing, and this is what is happening. And I really think it's destructive for the organization. And, you know, why should she then want me on her team if I can do that to her? But of course she did. So I was on another business trip. I was traveling, and I came back 3 weeks later, and she called me and said, oh, by the way, A, B, and C person is no longer with the organization. I want you to start on Monday. And she called me on a Saturday, and I'm like, can I think about it? And I was like, I need 24 hours to think about it, because your leadership style, it doesn't mesh with mine very well. She had a strong reputation of very, very different type of leader. And I really needed to think about whether I could work with that kind of leader, who had that sort of point of view of me, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, yeah, I think I can. And I went in on the Monday and told my boss what had happened over the weekend because she hadn't informed him, says something about her leadership style. And he's like, whoa, do you really want to do that and work for that person? And I said, yeah, I think I can. He gave me all the reasons why she was a really tough person and why he didn't want to lose me. And I'm like, look, it's a promotion. It's a really, really challenging piece of business. It's gone through some really, really tough times. I think I can nurture it. And I actually think I could report to this person because I know what I'm getting into and I've worked with her and I'm not scared of her.
Yeah.
And he's like, go for it. And, it's another business that I actually did quite well at. And I ended up, she left and I ended up reporting back to my previous boss, and that he turned out to be a little bit more of a challenging person to report to than she did in some respects, but again, found a way to navigate it. And we ended up, moving that business out of our division into another division because it was the right thing to do. And I led myself out of a job, which the whole organization just went, whoa, what have you just done? But I knew they'd find me something else, and they did in another division. And it was great. I ended up going from pharma to consumer to devices, and getting all of that different experience and have a really great legacy where people were like, yep, you can throw her into just about anything and she'll swim. From somebody they weren't sure they really wanted in the organization right at the beginning, because not sure you've got the skill set and you're coming from a really small country.
And I'll show you. I love that kind of theme throughout
Yeah.
this entire conversation today. What I am interested in is understanding now, I suppose, a little bit more about your thoughts on the future of life sciences, the future of leadership. So should we pick one of these topics to start with? What excites you at the moment, I suppose, about the future of life sciences?
I think that it's in a transition moment, and that excites me. You can see throughout my career, I get excited about change. It's always been an amazing industry to be in. I think being in an industry that helps others in a truly meaningful way helps people be better and to live better lives. And I think with all the changes that are going on right now, with how AI might change the R&D landscape, how we communicate with others is really changing. How the physician's role and their job is changing. The growth of mid-level providers, whether it be nurse practitioners, everything seems like it's in flux, and it feels like it's really complicated. But I think that's really exciting because that means that there's new things to discover, there's new ways to go to market, there's new education opportunities for healthcare providers as well as consumers, as well as patients. And so I think that it's exciting to have that opportunity to step into the unknown and maybe navigate new paths and create new opportunities around the biggest things like drug development to the smallest things like a better way to help physicians communicate with their patients and be a partner to physicians in that communication journey, to being able to help patients do better self-care, and consumers to be able to know what to take in this crazy world where there is so much junk science being thrown at them. So I think that's pretty exciting.
What about the future of leadership?
I think that's also changing, but I think the fundamentals haven't really changed. I talked a lot about people. I think having EQ, emotional intelligence, is even more important in today's world than it ever has been. I think the hierarchy world is going away. I think it's even more important to be a lattice and not a ladder. I think the span leaders now have of people reporting to them is huge sometimes, and actually bigger than what most of the research says should happen, because we've become flatter and flatter. And I think that means that, just leaning in even harder into your people skills and being able to develop people to be independent thinkers, independent leaders themselves. They might not have the title, but developing your team to be leaders of sub teams, even if they're leading their peer set, is more important today than it's ever been. And so I'd say the one big advice I would give people that are going into leadership today is take your people with you and really lean into that, think team first, versus self first. You might not always be able to direct. You're going to have to do a lot of guiding, and that's okay. Lean into it.
Fantastic. I absolutely loved today's episode. There's so many good experiences, frameworks, and I've been writing things down for things that I'm going to be doing with my team. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show.
I did. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.